I watched all of your,
All of them?
almost all of them,
Wow, that was.
and we ended up short of. I got interrupted when I was just finishing off the last three.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, the last three.
Yeah,
So you
but I
got, so you got through the Once Upon a Punch Card.
Once Upon a Punch Card. Oh, well, wait a minute. Maybe it was more than less.
Oh, okay.
That was just the one that I.
Oh,
You were just starting that in IBM's headquarters.
you didn't get through Once Upon a Punch Card, because when I asked Thomas Torf yesterday what we should talk about, he said, "We'll start with punch card systems with Rick."
Yeah. That would be good. Yeah. I think that's something that I can remember well.
So I should do some introduction here. Hi, this is episode Conversations with Kip. To this point, I've recorded a number of episodes, and none of them have actually been conversations. So today I'm going to have my first actual conversation with Kip. I'm here with my good friend and mentor Rick Roth, Richard K. Roth, here at his home here in southern Texas. Beautiful place, beautiful spring day. I appreciate Rick taking a few moments to sit down and chat with me.
I'm flattered that you took the time.
So, Rick was my boss for 19 years.
It was a long time.
That was a long time.
And then I retired in 2010 and went from working with Kip to build the biggest banking systems, financial systems in the world, to helping run our family jewelry store, one single location jewelry store.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and I found that all of the events-based principles that worked so well with the big banks worked equally well with a corner jewelry store in Waterloo, Iowa.
There you go.
And all the events-based concepts, all of the things that we learned along the way were as applicable on a smaller scale. However, we didn't have to use the world's biggest mainframe computers to do the job and do everything on a Win 7 PC.
There you go. But it's capacity. Capacity matters for these problems.
It's important to have the capacity be greater than the problem that you have.
Sure.
And so
Yeah.
we used to have to use the biggest mainframes to go engineer our way into making the problem fit inside that in the space available in there. And I found that with just a little bit of thought, I was able to implement the events-based concept without concern about performance inside my Win 7 PC. I did have to upgrade the PC here recently to a version T540 from a couple of years ago, but we do great with them.
So there was I've been thinking about what to ask you about today. There was a comment that you made. I'm like I could remember when, right? But about thinking that you're going to solve the problem by somehow creating just the right set of summaries. Through your career, you said, yeah, if people think that they're just going to somehow create the right set of summary structures, and that's going to solve their problem, then they're living in a fantasy world.
Yeah. And about 15 years ago, the big ERP vendors, when they were having difficulties with performance issues trying to implement events-based concepts, that was the sort of storyline that was out there, is if you just design the right summary tables, then you'll be able to go do all this stuff. You don't really need all that detail. And that lived on. That argument went on from about 95 or 98 forward. And finally, I think now everybody realizes that you really do need the event detail at the bottom of this. And you need to go have the right balances that you use to go solve the problems that reporting ends up being directed at.
Yeah, you can't just think that you're going to go to the right high-level summaries and the whole problem runs away.
No, and you can't just have the detail.
You can't have the detail because you can't do anything.
That doesn't do any good either. You got to have both.
You got to have both, and you got to be able to manage both, and you got to be able to fit it in the cycle.
Yeah, you got to fit it into the time and space that you have available to work with.
And what's the time typically that companies have to solve this problem?
So it depends on the problem you're dealing with. If you're dealing with operational problems, then you have last transaction, time since last transaction to solve it. If you're dealing with a typical financial reporting cycle, you're talking about daily cycles.
Yeah.
There used to be, 10 years ago, we had a big argument at one of our clients about whether we needed monthly or daily data, and that conversation went by the boards after 2 or 3 years of chasing it. But for financial reporting purposes, you have to have daily cycles,
Yeah.
and the daily cycles have to work within the constraints of a global environment where you have due days starting once every 8 hours, basically.
Yeah.
So really, it's not a daily. It's not 24 hours. It's 8 hours.
Yes.
And when you start thinking about how you build your systems to deal with being done in 8 hours, you can't assume you're going to use all 8 hours to get the stuff processed. You need to be, when problems happen, you need to.
You got to back up and recover. You got to be able to react to problems.
And you need to be able to recover, exactly.
Okay.
And so if you're down for a couple of days, you can't.
No.
You can't say,
catch
"Oh,
up.
well, I've got 16 hours to do this."
Right. Right. So it kind of gets. I mean, if you take an 8-hour window, you better have double your recovery time. But then there's all of the other stuff that goes on around it. So you really need to target this sort of processing
Sure.
within a 2-hour.
Yeah, when you think
3 hour
about people
space.
building apartment buildings, and they build balconies on the apartment buildings, you could never get more than 6 or 8 people onto one of those balconies. But they engineer the balconies so that you could park a semi-truck on there without a problem. It's just a case where you have to, substantially over-design the problem to deal with
Everything that can happen.
to make it sustainable for whatever comes your way.
On the 8 hours, just to make that clear, I mean, you think about as you roll around the world, you're going to have 8 hours in North America, South America hemisphere, 8 hours in an Asia time frame, and 8 hours in a
Yeah.
in a Middle East, Europe time frame, Africa time frame, and it happens consistently. I mean, you might get a break on Sunday, but no, not if you're dealing with the Middle East. Your break is Saturday, and,
That's right.
and really you're talking about that consistency of that schedule is very demanding.
Yeah. So it's got to be. It's pretty much. You pretty much have to be able to go deal with continuous transaction processing and creating continuous balances.
Yeah. So, talk about a little bit about, is there the number of instances you've seen that all of a sudden some technology showed up and man, the world has changed now, and all the problems have gone away that we've ever been dealing with in the past.
Oh man, that's an interesting. I remember back in the 90s, the early 90s, we had executive information systems showed up, and that was going to be the solution. And it was really a graphical interface that if you could populate it, then it would be really great to be able to see all of that. And of course, then we found quickly that it was really the data that fed it that was the problem, and so the graphical portion of it really only was a piece of it.
Yes.
And then we had the proliferation of PCs, and what is the role of a PC, and it ultimately became a question about what was the role of distributed computing in these enterprise systems, and we struggled with that. Eventually, we ended up with distributed systems as being something that people chased as the normative end that you would want to tend towards. And eventually, when the internet showed up, we spent a lot of time thinking that the internet was going to be, connecting all this stuff together was really going to be the solution. And now, once the internet really, matured, we found out that what you really want are centralized databases, process for
You gotta
most
get the
purposes,
balances,
kind
you
of
gotta-
like we had originally.
Yeah.
But along the way, all of this new technology, all the new pieces from graphical interfaces to IP connections that are high bandwidth have allowed us to go solve the whole problem, at least better than we did. It never was one thing. It's not. It's almost never one thing, right? It's not transactions or balances. It's not a graphical interface or a network connection or the speed of a processor or the ability to store large amounts of data or move data back and forth between central processing units and remote storage. It's the combination of all of those things that make for a solution. Because at one point or another, as you start developing solutions, you find that you bump up against one of those basic constraints, and then you have to engineer around that.
That sounds like a balancing act of some kind.
It is a balancing act, and so there ought to be a book
There ought to
written
be a
about
book
that.
written. Just to make that clear, I wrote a book called Balancing Act, and there's a quarter of the book that's spent on all of this stuff that Rick is talking about here. If you want to read about more of the details, you didn't. I liked when you started in the '90s though with graphical internet. You didn't start with punch card readers though.
I started in 1977. I started with punch cards in the first big system I worked on, which was the budget system for the state of Missouri.
Ah,
And so we were still using punch cards back in those days, and the great advance at the time was going from they were all batch systems with stuff printed out on paper, and the great advance was online. And I remember one of the guys, one of the partners that we worked for at the time, said, a big risk factor when evaluating how you scope a project is whether or not it includes online or not. So so going back to punch cards, true, but online is why I really kind of wandered into this.
Okay. Yeah, the thing is, I showed somebody the video, the Once Upon a Punch Card thing. He said, "Are you telling me that the punch cards were basically the transactions?" I said, "Yes. Yeah, they set of transactions, and you had another tray that was the master file balances, and you had to run them to update the master file balance, creating a new set of cards."
And the punch cards were the code as well.
Yep. Well, yes. There's another set that was the code that ran
Yeah.
that did the updates.
We could do the whole thing in 80 columns. Yeah.
So, did you know that the punch card was patented in 1928?
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So
That was before my time. My
another-
dad was 10 years old in 1928.
Okay. Yeah. Rick's dad was a great guy. So, in 2028, we're going to have some sort of celebration on the centennial of the
should.
punch card
I think we should.
system.
I think we should get together in Poughkeepsie. No, let's get together in New York.
Okay, let's do that. So, well, this was just what I was hoping to discuss with you.
Oh, good. Great. Well,
I think that there's a lot more we could talk about, but I've already talked about a few hours worth of stuff, and I don't know that people are that interested in anymore. I'm not sure they're interested in what I've already talked about, to be honest with you.
I thought all of it was very good. I thought it was, I like the idea of putting all those pieces together so that, I think what happens is people take on these big projects and they think about the problem they're most interested in, and then they start solving for that problem, but they leave out other dimensions of the problem, and it's by virtue of them running against, well, it doesn't really solve that. Oh, I'll start over with my next one, and I'll start over with mine. That is what leads to the proliferation of these subsystem architectures that we get, where you can't get between them.
And you got it. So there's a couple more comments that came to mind as I was thinking about it. One was, facing the data challenge. I mean, that's really, you're talking about a balancing process, but at the bottom of it, you've got to face the data, because the data is what
Right.
produces everything.
Yeah, the
that's
requirements are in the data.
The requirements are in the data.
And you have to really understand that, and you can't understand it just in terms of a data model, because data model kind of deals with the columns.
Yeah, but
It doesn't deal with the juxtaposition of the values in the
each column.
columns in each of the rows.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it's that aspect of understanding the data to be able to take a data set of real world data and use that to go see how you solve the problems you've tackled already, and which gives you the insight you need in order to realize how many of the different kinds of problems you're trying to solve are actually just different versions of the same thing. And if you start out building an accounting system, and you start out building a budget system, and then you start out building
Yep.
a sales reporting system, and then you start building a management accounting system, you'll end up solving the same problem over and over in different ways that create lots of different things you have to maintain, and create walls that stop you from being able to see the linkages between everything that goes from acquisition, conversion, to sales and collection, which is the basic cycle that every business deals with.
Yeah, yeah. There's another quote, and I don't know who this was from, but there's an unlimited number of easy to implement solutions.
When we started with it was Don Wani.
Don Wani, okay.
In the state of Alaska in 1980, when we built the statewide accounting system there, and we got up to the first day and we talked about how sort of difficult this was going to be. One of the issues in Alaska was data communications back in those days, and we had satellites had all sorts of issues, and there were limitations in it. We said to him at the time, well, you know, how we're going to be able to deal with the interior of Alaska, and I said, you know, satellite capacity doesn't, you know, we may not be able to get the communications to work effectively. And they said, well, if we need more satellites, then we'll send them up. But in the course of that, we talked about how complicated it was, and finally Don Wani looked at us, Rip Sanders and I, and he said, there are always an unlimited number of easy to implement, simple and low-cost solutions to every problem that won't work. I've never forgotten that, and it's all true. I think somebody else originally formulated that a slightly different way, but that's the first time I heard it, and I've never forgotten.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure to work with Ricky. Taught me guided me through a great deal of material we've talked about, and it was always a pleasure to work with.
It was a great career with Kip. I wouldn't have been able to retire had it not been for him.
Well, glad I helped with that. That was a good thing. Well, so I think we're done for the day.
Okay.
And maybe if there's if we get a lot of likes and a lot of views on this and a whole bunch of comments and a bunch of demand, then I'll make another trip back here to San Antonio to record some more.
We may not be at high risk of that.
We might not be.
But come back anyway.
Okay. I'll come back and we won't record anything next time.
Okay, very good.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.